Abdul Carter is not a generational prospect, but he should still be the number one pick for the Tennessee Titans. I'll explain why on today's edition of Locked On Titans.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, I'm going to be answering your questions and a little Friday mailbag. I'm going to tell you why Abdul Carter is not a generational prospect, but the Titans should draft him anyways. We're going to talk about the Titans' options in the second round of the NFL draft and in free agency. And finally, I'll answer some questions about the Titans from a big picture standpoint. Am I worried about the power structure? Should the Titans change jerseys? A lot of questions to get to on today's show. Before I dive in, do want to thank you for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. Speaking of every day, shout out to my everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday. Couldn't do it without you guys. And if you aren't an everydayer, you need to be one, because next week is off-season roadmap week. I'm going to go through the entire offseason for the Tennessee Titans in the course of a week and tell you what I think the ideal outcomes would be. Roster management, trades, cap cuts, re-signings, free agency, the draft. I'm going through all of it and telling you exactly what I hope the Titans do. Can't wait for it. Make sure that you don't miss it. But let's dive into today's mailbag. The very first question comes from my guy, the Canadian Titan, on Twitter. And he says, what does generational mean to you? Can you give an example of 5 generational talents in the NFL? Okay, so we're thinking about this differently. Think about a generational prospect and then a generational talent. One of them is we think, and one of them is we know. Like generational talents in the NFL are like Tom Brady, Julio Jones, go back like Lawrence Taylor, Barry Sanders, Randy Moss. Like those are like generational talents. And to me, what generational means is you are the best player by far at your position for your NFL generation. And I think generations in the NFL are about 10 years. Maybe you could call it 8 years. Maybe you could call it 12 years. But to me, a generation in the NFL is like 8 years. Think about a normal good player's timeline in the NFL. You come in the league when you're about 22, 23, maybe 24, maybe 21, and then you're out of the league by your mid-30s, by 33, 34. That's usually, so about 8 to 10 years is a generation. And I think when you talk about generational talents, you talk about the best players in NFL history who were the best of their generation. But when we talk about generational prospects in the draft, that is obviously not a guarantee. But I would say recently, Andrew Luck at the quarterback position, generational prospect, clean across the board, no issues, no downside, ready to go right away. Incredible. I think Myles Garrett at the edge rusher position is another guy who could get that tag. He was a generational prospect. It was clear and obvious Myles Garrett needed to be the number one pick. Julio Jones, as I mentioned, a guy got traded up for and drafted, wide receiver. Like Julio Jones was a generational prospect. There was no doubt about it that this guy is an absolute freak. You know what I mean? Like from day one, I think Adrian Peterson could have been a first-round pick, a top 10 pick in the NFL draft as a freshman coming out of Oklahoma. Like Adrian Peterson was a generational prospect. So my point of saying all of that is Abdul Carter is not that. Abdul Carter is not a generational Myles Garrett, Von Miller level edge prospect. But I still think that he can be a top 5 edge rusher in the NFL. So even though he's not generational, that doesn't mean that he isn't an incredible high-level prospect, a blue-chip player, an elite tier prospect, and the Titans shouldn't pick him number 1. Like, just because he's not generational doesn't mean that you should pass. I truly don't think there is a generational prospect in this draft. I don't. So that's how I feel about that. He's not generational, but he is an elite prospect, and the Titans should take him number one. Burned Bridges says, I know Abdul Carter's a generational talent. Well, I just kind of answered that. And you want him at number one. That's true. But wouldn't it be wise to trade back to number three and pick one of the four players we really want? It's a win if we get any of the four plus the extra picks. And I clarified, what four players are you talking about? And Burned Bridges says Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and the two quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. Well, look, here's the thing. You could say, hey, if we trade back to three, we're going to get one of those four players. But the Titans would be taking Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter because they don't believe in the quarterbacks. And if you believe, I personally believe that if you believe in these quarterbacks enough to pick them, you should be taking them number one overall. If you're like, we don't like Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders enough to pick them number one, but if they're there at number three, we'll take them. That's not a big enough gap for me to justify that mindset. Like, if you like Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders enough to take them at number three overall, you need to take them at number one and not play around with missing out on them. So to me, like, that's not even, I don't look at the situation that way to answer that. But if they don't want the quarterbacks at all and they like some of the top players, then sure, but you can't guarantee those quarterbacks are going to go in the top two picks. Andy Birthgate said, do you think it's reasonable that other teams would offer their first next year for number one? I'm thinking specifically Giants, Raiders, Jets, Saints. Yes, I do think it's completely reasonable that one of those teams would offer next year's first round pick and this year's first round pick for the number one overall pick. I think that's 100% going to be offered at some point in time. Gabriel Pilcher said, and shout out Gabriel, if the Titans trade back around pick 4 and Cam Ward is still on the board, would you consider that a good pick? I would, but again, if you like Cam Ward enough to take him at number 4 overall, then take him at number 1. You can't, if you like Cam Ward so much that you would take him at number 4, then you can't risk losing him, and you got to take him at number 1. But if you aren't as interested in Cam Ward enough to where you avoid it, you trade back and he's still there, you can't take him because clearly you don't believe in him. Tighten Up Squeaky says, if Vegas offers pick 6, a first next year and more, would you do that? Or is that too far back, considering both Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter aren't likely to go top 5? That is a bit dangerous, but they could always trade back and then trade back up. You know what I mean? We've seen the Titans do that before. It was John Robinson, but nonetheless, it's a move that we've seen made, quite honestly. So I wouldn't, if I saw it come through, I wouldn't be like, oh, the Titans are screwed, blah, blah, blah. But it is a little too far back for me. I would be a little bit nervous because I think they need to get Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter if they don't like the quarterbacks. Ben Estes, how would you feel on a scale of 1 to 10 if the Titans traded back with the Raiders and obtained the pick number 6, a 2025 second, a 2026 first, and a 2026 third? I'll tell you, I'll say a 7 because I love that trade. That's an incredible haul for the Tennessee Titans to acquire 3 additional top 100 picks in the next 2 drafts. That's great. But again, you dropped to number 6. Now you're looking at Mykel Williams. You're looking at maybe Tetaroa McMillan. And I think those guys are a step below Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter. Austin says, if the Titans do trade down, how far would you go? To me, I'd be looking like 3 or 4. That's what I would be hoping for. Dylan Ye Old MFer said, if we don't leave the draft with either Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, or one of the 2 quarterbacks, is the draft considered a failure? I need to see what the Titans get back for a trade down in that scenario. But yeah, it would be a tough pill to swallow if the Titans didn't take one of the quarterbacks or those 2 guys, because if they don't believe in the quarterbacks, you need to get one of those 2 guys. If they do believe in the quarterbacks, they need to take the quarterbacks. So yeah, those 4 are clearly the top options. Dylan Elam says, I know conversations have been about a trade down, but what if we trade down twice, gather plenty of ammo for next year's draft? I would agree with you. If the Titans trade down further than 3 or 4, then you might as well trade down again, because I don't think outside of like the top 5 or 6 players that there's a huge gap between 20 and 10. So I would be down for a double trade down if they're not convinced that any of the top 4 people that we've talked about are the answer for them. But with that being said, let's shift gears a little bit, talk about the second round of the draft and free agency. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. Never had the pleasure of going to an NFL playoff game for the Titans, but I know a lot of you guys have, and have talked about how incredible of an experience it can be. I remember the excitement and the energy of a few Titans games I've gone to that were regular season games. So I know those playoff games are even better. You can get tickets on Game Time. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for those events even easier. You can filter out the fluff and get only incredible deals on great seats. Game Time also has a panoramic view from your seat, so you know what you're going to be looking at when you sit down. And with their all-in pricing feature, you have no surprise fees at checkouts. It makes an incredibly smooth experience. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee always give you peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Titans fans, let's continue today's mailbag edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We talked about all of your guys' questions surrounding the number 1 overall pick and trades and all of that. But now I want to talk about later in the draft. Before I dive in, though, I do want to thank you again for making Locked On Titans your first to listen each and every day. Another reminder, next week is off-season roadmap week. I'm going to do a mock off-season with every single step of the way. You guys aren't going to want to miss that. It really sets the path as we get closer to free agency, the draft, roster decisions, all of that. But with that being said, Hunter says, if we stick and pick in the second round, pick number 35, who are your 2 favorite players for each wide receiver and or edge we should select? For me, at the edge rusher position, it's Mike Green out of Marshall and then Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State. Mike Green, with the Senior Bowl he's putting up, probably not going to be there in the second round, though, admittedly. So I got to see where things shake out a little bit more to answer these round questions. Right now, I don't feel I have a good grasp on where these guys are going to get drafted. After these all-star practices, after the combine in a couple of weeks, after that, then you start to get a clearer picture of where people around the NFL value some of these guys. But just based on right now, I'll say Mike Green, Jack Sawyer at the edge, and then at wide receiver, Matthew Golden, Isaiah Bond out of Texas, Emeka Ibuka out of Ohio State. Those would be great second-round options if any of them are there. Refuse to Speak, which is funny because Refuse to Speak had a lot to say, but Refuse to Speak asked multiple questions. If Armand Membo, Cam Williams, Jack Sawyer, Mike Green, Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, Refuse to Speak knows my mind, all right? If they're all there, who are you selecting at 35? This is if we draft a quarterback in the first round. Me, I'd probably go Mike Green. I think edge rusher is just so important. I think edge pressure is the second most important thing. Pass rusher is the second most important thing in football. So if you go quarterback number 1, get your edge rusher at the top of the second round. If they went Cam Ward, Mike Green, shut the front door. Like, that is an outrageous pairing. Who do you prefer out of Cam Williams and Armand Membo if they're available at 35? So it's 2 offensive linemen there. Cam Williams, the young offensive lineman out of Texas, and then Armand Membo out of Missouri. Membo, for me, is interesting. I think he could play tackle, but I think he might get kicked inside. So with that uncertainty right now, I'll go Cam Williams, the young prospect out of Texas, who could be physically dominant. More Refuse to Speak. Tez Johnson is an elite receiver. Would take him in the 4th. I don't think I agree with that. If he's an elite receiver, he wouldn't be available in the fourth. If you wouldn't, what receiver would you take in the fourth? So I have said that Tez Johnson is too small for me. I don't like the small receivers all that much because they get hurt so much. Look at like Tank Dell and Josh Downs. Incredibly talented players, always hurt. You know what I mean? Kyle Phillips, always hurt. To me, and again, the round value, I'm not, 100% confident on those, but like a Savion Williams out of TCU, a Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, Jimmy Horn out of Colorado. Those are all options that I think could be available early on day 3. Do you think it's worth taking a DB in this class because it's very deep? Yes. The Titans will need more cornerbacks with Cheeto and Snead having injury issues. Roger McCreary be on the last year of his contract. And you always need more cornerbacks. And then they need safeties. Like safety is a pretty prominent need for the Titans. So they definitely need to address defensive back probably twice in the class. Corbin says your thoughts on Jackson Dart. Probably a second-round pick, maybe late first round. I'm just not buying it. But we'll have more in-depth analysis on quarterbacks later on in the offseason. Isaiah says, how far do you think the Titans will go in free agency to fill major holes that aren't fixable in the draft? Well, free agency is before the draft, so they don't have the luxury of knowing what they can't fill in the draft before they go into free agency. I do not think the Titans are going to be as heavy in free agency this year as they were last year, just based on what Mike Borgonzi has said in his early tenure comments. I don't think the Titans are going to be that aggressive in free agency to fill holes. I think they're going to take a more patient approach this year and recognize that they need to build through the draft. Titans Rundown says, who's your favorite right tackle in free agency? Here's my thing. There aren't a lot of right tackles in free agency, in my opinion, but I think if you got Cam Robinson, Ronnie Stanley, Jedrick Wills, those would all be options. I think Ronnie Stanley is clearly the best player. I doubt the Ravens let him go, though. Cam Robinson would be a nice, solid option, but you would have to kick J.C. Latham probably back to right tackle because Cam Robinson has been a career left tackle, and you don't give him a decent contract to come in and change to the right-hand side. Same with Ronnie Stanley. J.C. Latham would be going to right tackle. Jedrick Wills played right tackle in college and went back to left tackle in the pros. I think you keep Wills at right tackle and Latham at left tackle, and you could bring in Wills, and that would be a lower-ended option with familiarity with Brian Callahan. How realistic? Mark King says, how realistic are our chances of getting someone like T. Higgins or Trey Smith? They're high if the Titans want them. The Titans are going to have $50 to $60 million in cap space. They can go out and do it. I think they're much lower for T. Higgins. I think Higgins is going to get paid too much, and the Titans paid Calvin Ridley last year. You can't pay both of those guys at the same time. Titans Talk says, what do you think about free agent receivers, and who would you look to add, if anyone? High-end, T. Higgins. Mid-end, Hollywood Brown. Low-end, Olamide Zaccheaus. All guys who I liked last year when we looked at free agency at different levels. Eric Callahan says, Trey Smith or nah? The answer is yes, but I'll dive more into that next week in offseason roadmap week. A little spoiler for you guys. But last question here is Ben McCurry. He says, would you rather keep Simmons or trade him for a second or a third and use the money to sign someone like Trey Smith? Time to cut Hooker and Landry. Well, I'm not going to answer the Hooker and Landry question. I'll save that for next week. And all I'll say is you don't need to trade Jeffrey Simmons to afford Trey Smith. You can have both of them on the team. And I'm not trading Jeffrey Simmons for a second or third round pick. I'm going to need a first round pick for Jeffrey Simmons. More questions coming at you. Some big picture Titan stuff coming right now. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at the board and selecting more for Travis Kelce on receiving yards. I'm going to go more for quarterback passing yards. And Prize Picks has a little bit of a promo here where either of the quarterbacks pass for over 1 passing yard, and it'll count as a win for you. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. Titans fans, let's cap off today's mailbag edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We talked about the number one overall pick. We talked the rest of the draft and free agency. Now I want to get into some big picture Tennessee Titans topics. Before I do, thank you for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. But our first question of our final segment here comes from Smokeopotamus. He says, what's your best case realistic offseason for us with free agency in the draft? Well, obviously, my guy Smoke, that is way too much for me to answer in just one episode, let alone just one question in one segment of the mailbag. So I wanted to take this opportunity to let you know that next week will be off-season roadmap week. So on Monday, I'm going to go through the Titans schedule. I'm going to talk about which players they need to re-sign who are currently free agents. Then we're going to move to the next day. I'm going to tell you what the Titans' current salary cap space situation is. I'm going to tell you who I think the Titans need to cut off the roster to save more money. I'm going to tell you who the Titans need to trade and who they need to restructure. So we're going to do a little house cleaning on Tuesday episode. Wednesday will be a mock free agency. I'm going to go through every single free agent target I think would make sense for the Tennessee Titans and tell you which ones I would actually sign. Thursday, a 7-round mock draft done by me, going through my ideal draft scenario for the Tennessee Titans. On Friday, I'm going to recap all of it and give you a total picture of what the Titans roster would look like after a mock offseason. It's offseason roadmap week next week. Make sure that you don't miss it. Great question, though, from my guy Smoke. But my guy Pablo from Argentina says, how do you think this terrible moment will impacting ticket sales, PSLs for the new stadium? I would imagine that it is not helping. And with how expensive the new stadium is going to be and with how bad the team is right now, I don't think it's going to be great for the casual fan. But the reality is this stadium is not just about the Titans. I hate when people say they don't deserve a new stadium. The stadium is about the city. It's about having the Final Four and having WrestleMania and having the college football playoff and having a Super Bowl and having a Taylor Swift concerts. And it's so much bigger than just the Titans as a franchise. And the reality is Titans fans make a ton of money by selling their tickets to other fans during games. So I don't think the Titans are going to have any problem with the PSLs and the ticket sales. Quite honestly, they're going to make their money. Second question for Pablo is, do you really believe it's a good power structure to have 5 assistant GMs who report to a GM who doesn't have final say? I feel like, Pablo, that's a mischaracterization of what's happening. Every team has an assistant general manager. Every team has senior scouting advisors. These are positions that almost every other NFL franchise has. The who has final say thing, the way I see it is Chad Brinker is just Amy Adams-Strunk. That's all. The GM, every GM around the NFL, whether they have final say or not. You know who has final say in a football organization? The owner. That's the only person with real final say is the owner. Chad Brinker is just an extension of the owner. Chad Brinker isn't going to, hey, I scouted that quarterback and I think that you're wrong and he sucks. Chad Brinker is going to go to Amy Adams-Strunk and say, here's what we're planning on doing. And Amy Adams-Strunk is going to say yes or no. And if Amy Adams-Strunk says no, then Chad Brinker is going to go back to Mike Borgonzi and say, hey, the owner said no. Chad Brinker doesn't have final say. Amy Adams-Strunk has final say. She's just using Chad Brinker as her stand-in for day-to-day operations. Landon said, how do you feel about the Titans' usage of Tajay Spears since he was drafted? I liked it in year 1. I didn't like it as much in year 2, but a lot of that had to do with Tajay Spears being injured. So he needs to get healthy, stay healthy, and be on the field. Gabriel Abraham said, do the Titans need new unis? If so, what would you like to see in them? Not a hardcore football question, but could be fun. Yeah, I would be down for a redesign. I don't love the Titans jerseys so much that I don't want them to change, but things can get worse, and we've seen some teams in recent years where their jerseys got worse. The main thing I want to see is I would like to see the Titans lean more into the sword logo rather than the flaming thumbtack logo. The sword is way cooler and modern, in my opinion, whereas the 90s thumbtack burning tee it just looks cartoonish. Final question here. Cody Weath says, do you have any grumpy old man takes on the NFL? By that, I mean things like no matter how long they're going to be in the NFL. You just don't get behind. Like, for example, I do not like the number system. My starting linebacker should not be number 9 and wide receiver should not be 0. I actually don't care about the jersey numbers, but my old man grumpy NFL take is I don't want the chain gang replaced by a microchip in the ball. Here's my plea. And it's rooted in like my larger thoughts on technology and AI and all that. Bit of a conspiracy theory brain when it comes to some of that technology stuff and what the ultimate end game might be. Looking at you, Terminator, looking at you. But the human element of sports is the best part of sports. The stories, the journeys, the character arcs of the players that we follow, watching their trials and tribulations, their triumphs, their failures. The human element of sports is what makes sports great. And when the chain gang puts down the marker and it's short by an inch, when the referee makes a bad call or a controversial call and we talk about it for the next 5 days on sports media, those are the best things about sports. The human connection that it brings together when we're all debating and we're all conversating, everybody's in on it. So every blown call, every bad situation, every perceived bad PR thing for the NFL, all it does is keep the conversation going. And whether you guys want to admit it or not, I think most of you will, our time on this planet is pointless. We are but a speck in the galaxy and the time frame. Like, our presence on earth and our lifetime is so minuscule in the grand scheme of things that the things that give our life value are the things that bring us together, the things that bring us joy. Like, ultimately, professional football is one of the most pointless things on earth, right? If you get down to the grand scheme of it, what would it matter? You know, it's a child's game that we pay way too much attention to and pay way too much money. And it's crazy, right? But at the end of the day, we're in it and we love it because it just brings us joy. It brings us happiness. You know what I mean? So for me, I guess I love that human element, even if it's a bad call that maybe the team shouldn't have won, but it gets us talking about it. Like, all of the human aspects. An umpire in baseball, ringing up a batter. Would the game be more entertaining? Would the game be more entertaining? Would it give you more joy in your short time on this spinning rock in space if there was a robot umpire who got every call right? No. I want to see an umpire behind the plate. Ring them up. That's entertainment. That's drama. That's joy. That's the human element. That's what I love about sports. So my old man yelling at a cloud take is, I don't want to put a microchip in the ball to replace the chain gang. I don't want robot strike zones in baseball. I don't want that. And I promise you, even if you're disagreeing with me right now, I promise you, you don't want it either. You don't. And I just don't want it to be too late before we realize that we don't want things computer generated. We don't want things perfect and science. Look at basketball. I think basketball, the NBA specifically, is struggling as a sport right now, mostly because we have figured out basketball. They have scientifically quantified the best way to play basketball, the proper way, the most efficient way. And now basketball is boring because everybody does the same thing. Pick and roll, drive, kick out to the corner. Pick and roll, drive, kick out to the corner. And three, dunk, three. They have quantified the science of basketball so much that has bored the game. I don't want that for my beloved football. Let's not lean so far to the technology and the science that we forget the human element and the human drama, which actually is what makes life special, not the perfection. So I know I got a little existential there, but that's my answer and that's my reason why. With that being said, that's going to do it for me today, folks. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. Off-season roadmap week next week. Don't miss it. I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.